Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about books and authors that I like. I love to read horror novels and I love to make lists. So I made a list of my favorite horror novels of all time. If you like horror, please hit like and subscribe. And let's get started with my list of my top 10 favorite horror novels of all time. At number 10 is Bloodkin by Steve Rasnic 10. Published in 2014. Bloodkin won the Bram Stoker Award for Best Horror Novel of 2014, and for good cause. I love Appalachian horror, and Bloodkin is an excellent example of that subgenre. Bloodkin has one of the creepiest villains I've come across in a horror book. The villain is a snake handling preacher, and Steve Rasnic Tim describes his hands being all puffy and leathery from all the snake bites he's endured. And the preacher, he travels with these two coffin-sized boxes full of the snakes that he uses for his religious services. He's a very creepy and imposing villain. The protagonist is a young girl, a preteen, who has been promised in marriage to this snake handling preacher. As soon as she hits puberty, she's going to be passed on to him. So she is dreading that day, and we as readers are dreading that as well. Super creepy. And a great example of Appalachian horror. So for the strength of its villain and the setting, Bloodkin makes it on my list of my all-time favorite horror novels, coming in at number 10. Coming in at number 9, A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. Published in 2015, A Head Full of Ghosts won the Bram Stoker Award for Best Horror Novel of 2015. Now, demon possession and ghosts, that kind of thing almost never works on me. I find it silly, really, more than anything. So when this book came out, there was a lot of buzz about it. And I resisted reading it. I figured demon possession, ghost, that's silly. I have no interest in that. And eventually, so many people told me I should read it that I gave in and I read it. And I loved it, which was surprising because it's a story about demon possession, which I generally find laughable. And I'm also not really a fan of books for young readers, young adults. And Head Full of Ghosts is borderline young adult, borderline YA. Still, I loved it. Paul Tremblay has a way of introducing rational thinking into the story to counteract the silliness of the ghosts and demons and such. And he does it in a way that still leaves room for the supernatural, but it makes the characters and their actions more believable and more relatable. In some horror stories, when a character sees a wisp of white or sees some object floating in the air, they immediately think of ghosts, which doesn't make sense. These ghosts don't exist. So why would a person assume that they are being haunted? It just rips me from the story, and it makes me not that interested in the characters because I think they're idiots. But Paul Tremblay, he keeps me interested because he uses rational explanations not to diminish the scariness or of the odd occurrences, but to heighten them, adding a psychological element to the story. A Head Full of Ghosts is a good example of this, but he uses this technique in a lot of his books, and I really like his work for that. Coming in at number 8, The Damnation Game by Clive Barker. Published in 1985, coming on the heels of Clive Barker's mega successful short story collections, The Books of Blood. The Damnation Game was Clive Barker's first novel, in which a gambling addict makes a Faustian deal with a devilish figure at the end of World War II. Some decades later, the figure comes back to claim his winnings, and the guy doesn't want to pay. Maybe his bodyguard will be able to help him. So the story is told from the perspective of the bodyguard. And like a lot of Clive Barker novels that would come after, the Damnation game has a brilliant opening scene. It takes place in a war-ravished Warsaw, Poland, where people are playing games of chance and placing bets on anything, regardless of how depraved or morbid it is. It's a creepy setting for a horror novel. Later, the story takes place in London. It's well-paced, gruesome, with compelling characters. I love Clive Barker. His descriptions are gorgeous and grotesque. His action scenes are skillfully executed, and all his talents are on full display in the Damnation game. Now, if you've seen my Clive Barker ranking video, you'll know that the Damnation game is not my favorite Clive Barker book, but it's going to be the only one on this list because the other ones are more fantasy than horror, perhaps. Coming in at number 7, the 1959 classic Psycho by Robert Bloch. I had seen the movie and loved it, and the story from the book is quite similar, but the movie has a sense of glamour to it. The actors are well dressed, good looking. Anthony Perkins, who plays the psycho, is a smart looking guy. And that house behind the hotel is gothic and imposing. But in the book, the villain is a short, sweaty, bald man, and the setting is dark and grimy, and dirty, and nasty, and swampy. And I liked it. It was dirty and grimy and intense and scary at moments. It's an excellent book, and it's a classic for a good reason. At number 6, published in the same year as Psycho, we have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I love me some Shirley Jackson. I have a video ranking all of her novels, and The Haunting of Hill House is the only one of her novels I would consider horror, and it's a classic. I love Shirley Jackson's protagonists. They always suffer from some sort of identity crisis or identity anxiety. They question their own humanness. They question their sanity. In this book, Eleanor is our protagonist. And she comes from a sheltered, subservient context where she spent her 20s isolated and looking after her invalid mother. Now, at the beginning of the book, her mother is recently deceased. So Eleanor has been invited to participate in a study, bringing 4 strangers together for a weekend at Hill House to test the effects, if there are any, of supernatural occurrences. So Eleanor, who has had little to no contact with people as an adult other than her invalid mother, she's lonely and she's naive, and she goes into this opportunity full of unwarranted, unearned optimism. And the book is effective because you can read it as a supernatural haunting story, or you can read it as a critical thinker and find more of a psychological meaning behind it. Plus, Shirley Jackson's writing style is beautiful. At number 5, Burnt Offerings by Robert Morasco. Published in 1973, Burnt Offerings is a story about obsession, the sacrifices obsession demands, the cost of compulsion. A family from the city, New York City, I believe, the family rents a house in the countryside to spend the summer in idle isolation. But the house has its own agenda. There is also a very good movie adaptation of this book, starring Karen Black and Bette Davis. When I finished reading Burnt Offerings, I so badly wanted to stay in that world, in that story, that I immediately downloaded the film and watched it. And the film is quite good as well, and it has a different ending, which also works. So I like the movie too, but I prefer the book. It's a story that's stayed with me. Has a little bit of a campness to it, fun vibe to it, but it can be scary too if it depends on how it hits you. At number 4, House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. Apologize if I butchered that name. Published in the year 2000, House of Leaves is a masterpiece. Roughly, it's about a house with irrational dimensions, and where a corridor appears in one of the rooms. A corridor that stretches and leads to various chambers seemingly without end. And the husband / father in this family, he decides to go and investigate. The story is about this labyrinth, and the story itself is a labyrinth because you're reading a manuscript that was created by a blind man who dictates to an assistant, and it's full of footnotes, and it refers to other published accounts of the house, and it refers to a documentary that was made, and criticisms of the documentary. And then someone finds this manuscript that was dictated by the blind man, and this person goes through and makes his own footnotes and inserts his own anecdotes about what he's going through in his life while he's reading this manuscript. So it's a labyrinth within a labyrinth within a labyrinth. The story is told through many layers and many filters, and the construction of it is just gorgeous. At times, it is hilarious. It's just, it goes to ridiculous, absurd levels of intricacy that are just funny, and at times it's terrifying, and at times it's truly poetic, and it's beautiful. It's a masterpiece. It's fantastic. At number 3, The Reddening by Adam Nevill, published in 2019 and winner of the 2020 August Derleth Award for the best horror novel of the year. The Reddening is the scariest book I've ever read. It's not even close. It's about ancient things that resurface on an island off the coast of Devon, England. It has archaeology, it's a cult, a conspiracy, flawed characters making questionable decisions and then paying a high price for them. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend Adam Nevill and The Reddening, but only if you're a confirmed horror fan. This is an intense read. At least it was for me. At number 2, The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin, published in 1972 by the author of Rosemary's Baby and Death Trap, Ira Levin. Stepford Wives is an American classic. It's about gated communities that are gated for a reason. Stepford Wives is a short book. It's about 140 pages, more or less, but it's a layered book. It's funny, it's suspenseful, it's scary, loaded with social commentary. There have been several movies made from this book, and many other stories have come along and imitated or satirized the Stepford Wives. But the original Ira Levin book is remarkable in its efficiency, and it's a lot of fun to read. At the top spot for my favorite horror book is a novel that isn't really horror, but it lives in the horror world. The story unfolds in a horror landscape, and it plays with horror tropes. And it's such a classic that it has gone a long way to establishing or reestablishing many of horror tropes that authors play with today. And I'm talking about the 1962 classic Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. At its heart, Something Wicked This Way Comes is a father-son story. In fact, I think it would be a great book for fathers to read with their sons. I bet that would be a lot of fun. The horror comes from a mysterious carnival that comes to this small American town. A carnival led by the Illustrated Man, or Mr. Dark, a man covered in tattoos of all the souls he has taken. He even has tattoos of 2 young boys from that small town. They haven't been taken yet. So the 2 boys must uncover and defeat Mr. Dark and his sideshow characters, which include a flying witch. And there's a hall of mirrors and a magical carousel that confront their victims with the cruelty of the passage of time. It's not a scary read, but it's a really fun read with a lot of heart and a lot of literary flair. So that's my list, my 10 favorite horror novels of all time. Of course, this list is likely to change as I continue to read more books. And maybe you have a horror book that you can recommend to me. And maybe it will make the list next time I revise it. Leave your comments below and your recommendations, please. And don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And check out my other videos and check out my other books if you like to read horror. If you like horror that's more on a psychological level, I've got lots of books out. I won't do a sales pitch on this video. You can find them wherever you get your books at. Thank you for watching. We'll see you at the next video.